There has been a lot on my mind as of late, balancing the cultural and everyday observations I have between the weekly content on international relations. I didn't want to do this in a stream or try and do this in an impromptu real talk fishing video, but rather write my thoughts out so hopefully you'll see where I'm coming from. So let's begin. Since the end of the Cold War, the world stage of international politics has faced an ongoing debate, one between unipolarity and multipolarity. Since the fall of the Berlin Wall and the dissolution of the USSR, many, like that of the late Charles Krauthammer in 1990, discussed the unipolar moment in Foreign Affairs magazine. Later that decade, Francis Fukuyama would write The End of History in The Last Man, where he had detailed, unlike the Marxist ideal that history would end with the proletarian utopia Marx had envisioned, it would come with liberal democracy triumphantly standing over the alternatives. Since the laudable and nowadays often laughable Pax Americana never really came to fruition, especially for those in its crosshairs, the US government and its non-governmental allies pursued a path of universalizing globalization, the great Americanization of the world. It changed from globalization and optimism of the new millennium to an authoritative state in the midst of a global war on terror. What was posed was a unique challenge. How does the traditional nation-state, with a massive standing military force filled with the latest in R&D spending and psychological operations, go to war against ideologies, terrorist cells, and a fundamental religious belief that could hardly be found anywhere in the West? Even William T. Kavanaugh pointed this out in his book, The Myth of Religious Violence, that modern American ideals of religio-political separation were uniquely Western, and modern concepts to the rest of the world, where the Enlightenment never took place, nor did the Reformation. However, despite its withdrawal from a 20-year engagement with the Taliban in Afghanistan, an earlier withdrawal in Iraq only to come back to fight ISIS as well as in Syria, the US has effectively memory-holed the threat of non-state actors like Islamic fundamentalists. The idea of another 9/11 happening dwindled as it pursued an effective campaign of pandering to Western sensibilities. The Trotskyist neoconservatives gave way to the progressive globalists, a rainbow flag for every nation, protest signs in English with a fancy color attached, and a concern for women's schools and education in places where women's lib never came to be, stands to show how culture, a foreign policy of deterritorialization, works wonders both at home and abroad. It raised and changed the stakes of the debate, and has certainly evolved since the times of 1991, 2001, or even 2021. Today, in 2022, the debate extends beyond ideology but the question of power. Who will rule? Who can maintain an empire? And if possible, can the current one fall at this present moment? Many, like Niccolo Soldo, Fukuyama, and Richard Hanania, have argued that the USG, the United States government, is in a particularly powerful position, so much so that Fukuyama has declared his ideas to have held through with a triumphant apologetic of his nearly 30-year-old work. Yet the central question, as posed by many in the field of international relations, has been the paradigm of how power transitions from one power to the next. A.F.K. Orgnoschi, an Italian-American scholar and political scientist, devised and proposed power transition theory in his 1958 textbook, World Politics. In his view, Orgnoschi wrote, quote, "An even distribution of political, economic, and military capabilities between a contending group of states is likely to increase the probability of war. Peace is preserved at best when there is an imbalance of national capabilities between disadvantaged and advantaged nations. The aggressor will come from a small group of dissatisfied strong countries, and it is the weaker, rather than the stronger power that is most likely to be the aggressor." End quote. However, it is the evolution of this theory that is important to note. That conflict is often to trigger during times where one feels that their power is slipping, or that there is high potential energy for rival states to carve out a sphere of influence. Ronald L. Tamman, in his 2000 book, Power Transitions, Strategies for the 21st Century, expands on this, saying, quote, "War is most likely, of longest duration and of greatest magnitude, when a challenger to the dominant power enters into approximate parity with the dominant state and is dissatisfied with the existing system. Similarly, alliances are most stable when the parties to the alliance are satisfied with the system structure. There are further nuances to the theory. For instance, the sources of power transition vary in their volatility, population change being the least volatile, and political capacity, defined as the ability of a government to control resources internal to the country, being the most volatile." End quote. This becomes the nature of the debate today, between power parity, how power is attained on the international stage. This will become the focus of a much larger discussion on my channel going forward with regards to international relations, yet I must introduce one more topic before trying to translate this to a smaller scale. When it comes to the issue of power transition, or even a multipolar world, wherein there are options for non-aligned states to choose and throw their respective lots in with, we must examine the concept of revisionist versus hegemonic states. Hegemonic states are pretty straightforward. They are part of, or are the state of the current ruling hegemony, just as the Romans, or the English, or for right now, it is principally squared on the United States being the de facto hegemonic power since the end of the Second World War. Revisionist states are nation-states whose objective is to change or to put an end to the current system. In this case, the post-war rules-based order that is so often discussed in the headlines and current international relations literature. It is difficult to try and make these terms analogous to what's going on with politics at home, but I find the concept of revisionist and hegemonic states to be rather fitting for the current situation here in the West. Both here in the United States and in Great Britain, its old stock faces a revisionist force that has become the dominant hegemon in its own power elite. The revolution came in the night of depression, and the desire to avoid the wars of the world gave birth to a new hegemon after 2 generations of young men of the old and new world were wasted away in the battlefields of Europe. We are what's left, or those who have come to realize what had followed in the great chiliastic promise of peace on earth and no war ever again was nothing more than a false promise, a sense of egalitarian security that would usher in a brighter tomorrow. The only thing that is bright is the afterglow of thieves getting away with looting a treasury and deliberately ushering in a tyrannical environment where no one gets along and the people that look like you are now public enemy number 1. Here in the West, we are the revisionist powers, not just in terms that are commonly associated with revision, like history, but we wish in the IR sense of the word to change or put an end to the current system for the betterment of the nation and our compatriots. Although the use of the term revisionist I am highly skeptical of using, because even though we are fitting the IR definition of the term, it comes with its own political baggage in other contexts. This is where we are, though, and the question that I think power transition theory, along with what other writers have discussed, offers a pathway of understanding on how to dismantle the current postmodern hegemony. Military power parity, in terms of nation-states, is not as applicable here, as I doubt anytime soon any rivaling political group in the West is going to be able to go toe-to-toe with any standing military or police force. Power, of course, comes in other forms, besides the hard power of a military-industrial complex. Power can exist in aesthetics, a vision, the capability of mass socialization, and economic resilience. Even in times of international sanctions campaigns, states like Iran or Cuba have taken a beating, but survive and focus on what they have within their own respective borders. Iran has a well-capable manufacturing sector, and Cuba has a vermiculture unlike any other part of the world. In our instance, economic resilience is a firm necessity. This would mean being well enough trained and employed to survive, and have a firm network of friends that in case you are fired for stating the plain fact that women can't be men, you have readily available employment, or at least you have your own business. Mutual aid societies must make a return, and that is the future goal and project of the American Old Glory Club, which at the time of this writing and recording, I am the vice president of. This also means alliances, at least for the time being. What is considered to be the dissident right, a term that I grow frequently more frustrated with using, is a large mix of Christians, traditionalists, neo-pagans, disaffected libertarians, paleo-conservatives, neo-reactionaries, and old alt-righters and more, all lumped in together as a catch-all term where, much like apes in a cage, are either jerking each other off or are throwing their own shit at one another on various social media platforms and other intellectual ghettos that we find ourselves in after we've been banned or deplatformed elsewhere. This will require us to get along a lot more, at least in the areas we can. A loose confederal model will be required, and if you would like to hear more on that, I would recommend Ryan Turnipseed's work and his numerous discussions on that issue. While many can agree on clearing them out, a viable alternative and positive vision also demonstrates power, or at least the allure of power for people wanting something different and something better. If we, the revisionist state that we are, although I think I like the term restorationist better, we must offer a secure, positive future, one where men aren't addicted to online pornography and can use its techniques for the better. I'm not suggesting that we use the advertisements cooked up by the madmen of Madison Avenue to peddle some kind of kitsch, trad 1950s aesthetic, but one, rather, wherein it is feasible to see people having families on one-income households, immigration ceased, that paints a way forward for a positive future. I am preferable to an archaeo-futurist aesthetic, but I hope this can spur a discussion going forward. Power also means the capability to command, and to attract those disaffected within the current system. A viable, and dare I say a sensible, alternative must be available to those within the power structure. At the present moment, the current hegemon with its various shades of blood libel, promoting medical assistance in dying to a rather all-lily-white cast in a commercial, as well as pushing for debauchery with children, seems to be all over the place and metastasizing to the last redoubts of resistance. To respond to this, a cocktail of synthesis of tradition, modernity, religiosity, and vitalism will be part of our ongoing cause and dialogue against the current hegemon within our respective nations, an inverse chemotherapy, if you will. There is much that I think that IR, work, and theory can be applied to those who advocate for a progressive vision, especially in the traditional high-low versus middle model of de Jouvenel, and that of nationalists and those who have grown tired with the current hegemon who wish to seek its revision or outright change. This video has been more of me thinking out loud, trying to see where I regularly talk about with regards to the world stage, and trying to bring it a little closer to home. We are indeed revisionists, restorationists, or at the very least oppositional, but it cannot just be standing here flailing about the doom and gloom of what's to come or what's already here, but rather, as many like to say on the left, we must do the work. And what work is there to be done? Plenty. Whether it's meeting up in person, getting involved locally, setting up community organizations, alongside just being an individual not terminally online, although that last one I think applies more to the younger portion of my audience. In the current situation at hand, it is safe to say that much of the dissident right, or the pivots of being sensible and grounded, to avoid overtly political and investigated labels, are not the hegemon in power. They are indeed revisionist states and groups, but I believe there is much to learn from international relations and its application in a smaller, local, political scale. Do let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you all next time. Godspeed, and stay prudent.